the Shepherd's Chapel. Welcome to this family Bible study hour. We're ready to get back in our Father's Word. I think we've pretty well covered capital punishment, how that our Father demands it, how that Christ in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17, especially in verse 21, the Greek word kill there is phonios, which means criminal homicide. He said, you're going to perish. You're in great danger of perishing, meaning when you finally are dispatched to the Father, the one you took's life is waiting for you there. And many might say, well, document that. We just did. Why do you think God demands capital punishment? Because you dispatched that other person there. Friend, it is your turn. That's why God expects capital punishment. And it's real sad that God's law isn't fulfilled on this. You wouldn't have nearly so many ready to do murder in the world today. And thank God we won't have people like that around us too much longer anyway. They're making not only will they make that trip, if they don't get their act together, their chances of overcoming are very slim, and we'll get rid of them forever. Won't the world be a much better place? So, and some, I can hear it now. Oh, dear God, did you hear what he said? And that's not my Father. That's his plan. He does not put up with nonsense. And those people will either shape up or we're going to ship them out. The eternity is coming when we're going to have total peace, and you can't have peace with people like murderers, that commit criminal homicide around. So, good riddance. Now, wouldn't it be something if they could all change their ways? Too bad they can't, or won't, whichever the case may be. Enough said on that subject. We'll pick it up now with verse 14, which goes to a different part of, and bear in mind this all has to do with civil law, this particular chapter 19. If you wish to have more fortification concerning capital punishment, another good spot is Numbers chapter 35. It will help you along with many other severe sins, crimes. Verse 14, and it reads of chapter 19, the great book of Deuteronomy, Hada Baharim, this is the law, Moses' last teaching, so listen carefully. Verse 14 reads, thou shalt not remove thy neighbor's landmark, which they of old time have set in thine inheritance, which thou shalt inherit in the land that the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess it. You know, even when Israel camped at night, it made the shape of a five-pointed star, the way the camp was set up. And the lots determine your amount of space where you parked. That's where we get our term, even in this generation, a city lot. It comes from that, your parking place, so to speak. But at the same time, a large stone was usually placed at the corners of a man's property. And to move one of those was a very serious offense. It still is to this day. They did not exactly have, well, I don't want to downplay, they were able to survey pretty accurately. They had a lot of practice because they cast a lot of lots in their moving. But today we have surveyors, of course, but they still will set a corner stake or stone, one or the other. I like to take this one step deeper on a spiritual level. Don't move a man's rock, meaning God is our solid rock. Satan is not our rock. You'll find when we get to the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32 that God is our rock. So don't let anybody you move the rock that determines your inheritance, which is to say your belief upon our Father, by giving you a bunch of garbage for truth. It won't fly, friend. You got to focus on the Word of God, for within it is success. Outside of it, you're on your own. Verse 15. Now concerning false witnesses. One witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity or for any sin, in any sin that he sinneth. At the mouth of two witnesses, not one, 2 witnesses, or at the mouth of 3 witnesses shall the matter be established. One won't cut it. Do you know why? Verse 16, here comes the false witness. And what does that mean? Let's talk about that one just a little bit before we go to the false witness, and we'll get 2 birds with 1 stone here. Now, many people like to talk, and talking is a good pastime, discussing. But when it turns to an innocent party and you begin to repeat stories you have heard, not knowing they're a fact, you are bearing false witness. I hope you understand what's going to happen to you, and it may, and you'll never understand why it did. But if you bear false witness against an individual, especially if it be a child of God, guess what's going to happen to you? God has this way of, when you are in a sin such as false witness, that you're naming your own sentence. It's going to come down on your head. So malicious gossip, I suppose that's one level above just plain old common gossip. They're both bad enough, but malicious is where it does harm to a person's character, their reputation. After all, a man's reputation is the most valuable thing he has, his name, his good name. It is the most valuable thing you have, because that's what people think of you in a community. And when people like to bear false witness, they're bringing the wrath of God down on their own neck. So it's well and good to talk, to visit. But if you repeat it, if someone repeats a thing to you, ask them, where did you hear that? Trace it back, nip it in the bud. So where's your proof? Well, I don't have any proof. Brother so-and-so said that to me. Well, you don't have any reason to repeat it if you don't know it's true. You can be committing a sin that God's going to punish you for. And you maybe don't even know it's a sin. Well, that's what we read the word for, is to let you know. So malicious gossip is a very dangerous thing. God takes it very serious. So again, when you hear stories put out about an individual, trace it back, ask them, pin them down. You know what's going to happen when you start pinning them? They're going to change their story fast, usually. Because most times they don't know what they're talking about. Something they heard. Did you hear what I hear? It reminds me of the 2 witnesses that tried to ruin the reputation of the young woman in the garden in the Apocrypha, and her name, Susanna. Yeah, it's the story of Susanna. And Daniel got the 2 old boys roasted, as they should have been. They were bearing false witness against her. Everybody else said, poor Susanna, did you hear what Susanna has done? And Daniel comes along and he said, no, I don't know anything about it. He said, trot me one of the so-called men out here that saw her doing this thing. And he said, under which tree did you see her do this? And this false witness said, that one over there. And then he said, take him over there and bring the other one to me. He said, which tree did you see it happen? He said, over there. And they did away with both of them because they were lying. So don't be so quick to listen to gossip. Susanna, I've even got a tape titled Susanna. If you have a little habit of gossiping, if I were you, I would take it upon myself to hear it. Okay, be that as it why? It makes God angry with you. You may be trying to live a good life and have this little old habit of yakety, 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 telling stories about people that aren't true. God doesn't like it. Okay, now this is what happens to them. Verse 16. If a false witness rise up against any man to testify against him that which is wrong, that means repeating gossip or lying, 17, then both the men between whom the controversy is shall stand before the Lord, Now remember that. They're going to get before the judges, all right, but they stand before the Lord and He knows. All right, you don't con Him. You don't kid Him. Before the priest and the judges, which shall be in those days, 18, that's even to this day, and the judges shall make diligent inquisition. That means they are very carefully going to examine, and that's why if you're repeating something about someone, you'd better have proof, friend, or you're going to be found out. And behold, if the witnesses be a false witness, and hath testified falsely against his brother, do you know what happens to them? Listen, 19. Then shall ye do unto him as he had thought to have done unto his brother. He gets the same thing on his neck. So shalt thou put the evil away from among you. God doesn't like it. Verse 20. And those which remain shall hear and fear, and shall henceforth commit no more any such evil among you. You know, when they really see how dangerous it is to gossip or to bear false witnesses against people, then they find another occupation rapidly. You know why? This is God's feelings on it. 21. And thine eye shall not pity. Don't you feel sorry for them as you have to flog them and run them out of town. But life shall go for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. So if you're bringing a story down on someone, be ready. All that means is that you're going to get the same thing on your head, only God usually adds a little extra dressing to make sure you get the point. So if you participate in that sort of thing, false witness, and you're always having trouble and you just don't understand why, well, now you know. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Hand for hand, foot for foot. You're going to get it. It always happens. God doesn't let it slide. So this is one of the reasons many have trouble in their life. And it's really sad because it's useless, serves no purpose, and is a terrible sin. Now, there are many courts held throughout the land where in divorce cases and what have you that people stand up and lie about what their mates did. Don't worry. They're going to get their comeuppance. Lawyers will say, well, you want to make it sound as bad as you can, even if you have to fudge. A lawyer can't say fudge, but that's what it means ultimately. And he becomes guilty also in God's eyes and will answer. The judges of truth and honesty are far and few in between that absolutely discipline themselves. Now there are some good ones. I don't want to knock on somebody's toe, but I know a big fake that doesn't live too far from here, down in lower Arkansas, that I was called as a witness. He said, you couldn't believe the word that man said. Every word I said was truth, and God will get him. Old Porky's going to pay. Anyway, that's a different story for a different time, and a story I won't tell, all right? It wasn't on my behalf. It was for an innocent party I was witnessing, and it was the gospel truth. Anyway, judges overstep their bounds sometimes because they can feel so very important. So, my friend, be careful. Be very careful how you talk about people or against people. It can backfire on you, and it isn't that it can backfire on you. You have a guarantee from God that it will. God's going to get you, and He never misses on that one. It's up to you. Think about it. Pray about it. Chapter 20. Chapter 20 has to do with combat. It has to do with war. The laws of war as to how we will do our battles. All right? Chapter 20, verse 1, and it reads, when thou goest out to battle against thine enemies, and seest horses and chariots, and a people more than thou, I mean a bunch of them, got the advantage. Be not afraid of them, for the Lord thy God is with thee, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. Now, I know one group of men that absolutely can vouch that this is a fact. When a Christian army takes the field, God is with them, and they have the victory. I don't care how many of them they are, and I speak of those that were in the Chosin Reservoir campaign. There were only Air Force, some, especially in the air, naturally, British Royal Marines, about 12,000 American Marines, and 2,000 or 3,000 U.S. Army, good troops, all. And we had 8 Chinese armies around us. In other words, there was about roughly 14,000 of us, and there was 120,000 plus 280,000 more. Those odds are just unsurmountable. But God saw us through, and we fought back to the coast in a different direction. And we only lost a little over 2,000 men in that campaign, and they lost somewhere around 60,000. God does go before His army. That is a living proof even in this generation. If God is with you, you don't have to be afraid. God's in control. If you begin a ministry, there are no giants left in the world. You become the giant if you have the faith to know. Don't be afraid. Put on the gospel armor and get out there, take names, and kick dragon. All right? You don't have to worry about anything. God takes care of His own. Verse 2. And it shall be, when ye are come nigh unto the battle, that the priest shall approach and speak unto the people. In other words, you pray before you go into battle. I'm going to tell you what, you've always heard in the military, I don't know if you have in civilian life, there are no atheists in foxholes, all right? Because if there's one thing that will bring you, believe it or not, I know this may be hard for peacetime people, but it's real easy to find the Father in severe combat, all right? You know that you know that you know. Verse 3. And shall say unto them, Hear, O Israel, ye approach this day unto battle against your enemies. Let not your hearts faint, fear not, and do not tremble, neither be ye terrified because of them. In other words, you can put that much faith in God. I remember from World War II, General Patton was on a rough march. It seemed that the weather was not agreeable, and he asked a chaplain to write a prayer. And I'm sure he was saying a lot of them himself that probably carried more weight than what the chaplain wrote. But the weather did break, and they made their destination, and they beat the enemy. God listens to His people as those people scattered. Verse 4. For, I'm talking about the real house of Israel scattering, not the house of Judah around the world. Verse 4 reads, For the Lord your God is He that goeth with you. He won't forsake you, beloved, to fight for you against your enemies, to save you. We have a saving Father, and He takes care of His own, whether it's a civil matter or a national matter. He takes care of His own. It's too bad, unfortunately, that we get leaders sometimes. Why? I don't know why people put inadequate people in office. They just do. Maybe it's because they bear enough false witness they can make it, or maybe we're slipping and letting too many socialists, uneducated people into the system. I don't know. Verse 5. And the officers shall speak unto the people, saying, What man is there that hath built a new house and hath not dedicated it? That means he hasn't consummated it, actually, and that's enough said. Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man dedicate it. In other words, you began to, as you got the troops, you mustered them. These were questions God would have you ask of the troops. The first very rattle out of the box was, don't be afraid. I don't want any of you troops to be frightened. A coward dies 1,000 deaths, a hero only once. Verse 6. And what man is he that hath planted a vineyard, and hath not yet eaten of it? Let him also go and return unto his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man eat of it. Well, how can God send all these troops back? Well, God's going to defeat the enemy anyway. We're going to lose some men, yeah. But it doesn't matter. You want to cull your herd pretty good before you go into something as serious as combat. That's important. But this shows the love and the compassion of our Father. Verse 7. And what man is there that hath betrothed a wife, and hath not taken her? Let him go and return unto his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man take her. This was so that a man had family, and there was seed that would follow him. And this is important. Murderers don't realize it, but what they cut off when they murder someone is also the seed that would follow. That's why God takes it so heavy. Verse 8. And this is a command. And the officers shall speak further unto the people, and they shall say, what man is there that is fearful and faint-hearted? This is a legitimate question. That is fearful and faint-hearted, let him go and return unto his house, lest his brethren's heart faint as well as his heart. In other words, a coward is not going to do you any good in battle. If anything, he's going to harm himself and many others. You're better off to get rid of him. This is why that in preparing troops, that we will call it indoctrination into the services, is a little tough. Why is it so tough? To weed out the cowards, to weed out the faint, to weed out those that just haven't got it. And this has nothing to do with those that have mental problems or things of that nature that are just not cut out. Gunfire alone will many times, I'm going to say, and this is just a guesstimate on my part from actual experience, I'm going to say that if you take a group of 70, 80 to 100 men and you begin a rifle range expedition of firing many, many rounds of actual ammunition, that 2% of your troops will have an inner ear complication or something of that nature, that they'll drift off on you. They just go bananas. Do I want to say that? I don't mean berserk. They just simply lose it. They can't handle it. And it is I suppose the concussions from the powder itself that gets to their brain, and they simply, well, you certainly want to find those people before you get into actual combat. Number one, for their own safety, but really also for the safety of the men that must be in combat. Why? You want to know who's over here on your flank, that when the going gets rough and you got maybe 10 to 1 coming in against you, you want to make sure that he's protecting your flank and isn't running. Because you take disciplined, trained troops can defend themselves quite adequately in most cases. But you let one coward be in the group, and he can lose the whole battle and get many people killed. So though that may seem, and you might say, well, why are you going so much into combat? Well, I'm speaking from experience. I'm telling you why God would say this. Well, the coward just gets off easy then. No, he doesn't. Anybody that will not fight for their family or for their nation when pagans are trying to take it over is not worthy to say he fought for it. And he will pay a great price. Now, this has nothing to do with people in World War II and what have you that were 4F. They were not capable physically of combat. They can stand proud and true and tall. And so I'm not talking about people like that. I'm talking about people that will lie about their condition or try to get waivers to get them out of military fighting and so forth, or the military service, and not defend their nation. They should never hold office in the nation. If they're too cowardly to fight for the nation, to lay their life on the line for this great nation, they should never be allowed to hold a political office. They're not worthy. They're not a full man. They're only part, and a very small part at that. Which part of man? Well, you'll have to figure that one out for yourself. I've already lost my place. Let's go to the next verse, verse 9, and it reads, "And it shall be, when the officers have made an end of speaking unto the people, that they shall make captains of the armies to lead the people." In other words, get rid of the cults before you appoint officers, for heaven's sakes. Or you might get a cull appointed as an officer, and therefore he could take advantage of his authority to protect himself in a cowardly way. So get rid of the cowards first. Verse 10, "When thou comest nigh unto a city to fight against it, then proclaim peace unto it." That is, give them an opportunity to surrender. And again, there are many points of law that enter into this. It's according to what city it is, whether or not this applies, all right? I'll explain before we finish this chapter, perhaps not this lecture, but before we finish this chapter, I will explain my comment. 11, "And it shall be, if it make the answer of peace, and open unto thee, then it shall be that all the people that is found therein shall be tributaries unto thee, and they shall serve thee." That's the way it goes. Now, there are certain peoples that this would not work with, all right? Again, I say so that you feel the word contradicts itself. 12, "And if it will make no peace with thee, but will make war against thee, then thou shalt besiege it." And besiege means exactly that. Verse 13, "And when the Lord thy God hath delivered it into thine hands, thou shalt smite every male thereof with the edge of the sword." 14, "But the women and the little ones and the cattle and all that is in the city, even all the spoil thereof, shalt thou take unto thyself, and thou shalt eat the spoil of thine enemies, which the Lord thy God hath given thee." Now, and again, there are limitations to this, of even taking certain people into servitude. Verse 15, "Thus shalt thou do unto all the cities which are very far off from thee, and are not of the cities of these nations." That's what you're going to do. These nations, now you're getting there. 16, "But of the cities of these people, which the Lord thy God doth give thee for an inheritance, thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth." In other words, there's one set of cities that you don't let anything live that is therein. 17, "But thou shalt utterly, completely destroy them, namely," and now he names them, "the Hittites, and the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee." Why is that? Well, because those nations had taken within themselves basically the second influx of Nephilim, fallen angels. And And there was a second influx. You with companion Bibles, you have an appendix that covers the giants or Nephilim, that whichever pronunciation you prefer in your little vocabulary. But they were the reason that Noah's flood came to be in the first place at the first influx of the fallen angels. And God, inasmuch as they left their first habitation and came to seduce women, and they weren't particular of what nation, naturally Satan tried first the daughters of Adam, through which Christ would come, and that's why he destroyed them in the first influx. The second influx, they basically settled among those particular nations. And that's why God wanted them destroyed. You couldn't take them or any part of them, even their animals. And when you read some of the more some of the laws that are really distasteful, it's because of these people and their practices even with animals. So our Father was very strict on that point, that certainly you didn't offer peace to one of those nations. All right, so that's why I'm saying, if it sounds that the word contradicts itself, it does not. And you might wonder, well, why are they so bad? Well, read the first 6 verses of the great book of Jude and familiarize yourself with how Satan utilizes certain angels to destroy the plan of God. And it's a very serious thing when you get right to it. Verse 18. If you don't kill them, this is what happens, that they teach you not to do after all their abominations which they have done unto their gods. So should ye sin against the Lord your God. In other words, you don't do that. You don't practice any of that stuff. Well, what stuff is that? Well, let's go to the New Testament. It's probably put better there by Paul than anyone else as to what it is they did, some of them. Paul spoke of it when he said, professing themselves to be wise, they become fools. This is Romans chapter 1, verse 22. 23, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, mortal, that is, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to the uncleanliness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up unto the vile afflictions both, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meat, which means death. So that's why God said, kill them all when you take one of those places. Why? It was men of old and of renown, meaning influx from the Nephilim, that brought these perversive things into being. Think about it, friend. That's New Testament. Okay, well, we're going to stop there for today. Don't miss the next lecture as we continue on into the laws of war and the laws of Almighty God. All right, bless your heart. You listen a moment, won't you please?